So can I welcome everyone back? I hope everyone is suitably refreshed. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you Lucy Bailey, who's going to talk to on the subject. I'll try and get this right. Fawkes Fairfaxiana, circa 1815 to 1825. JWM Turner's illustrations for the past, for the future. Lucy.
Right. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Alan and the Thoresby Society for inviting me to talk today. I imagine many of you may be familiar with Farnley Hall near Otley and of the connection between Water Fawkes and the artist JMW Turner. My presentation is part of a larger project to explore the collecting and patronage of Water Fawkes within the wider culture and politics of early 19th century reform. Whilst the landscape colours by watercolours by Turner are the most famous part of Fawkes's collection, other works by the artist, such as those discussed in my presentation, and Fawkes's wider interrelated practices involving agriculture, architecture, literature, antiquarian and natural history pursuits are little known. Water Fawkes owned a large country estate, Farnley, in Wharfdale, Yorkshire, and was a figure prominent in regional and national politics, campaigning for political reform. He also had a keen interest in the arts and was an important early patron and personal friend of Turner's. It is likely the men met in 1799, with Fawkes buying his first work in 1804. The artist first stayed at Fawkes's Wharfdale estate in 1808 and thereafter became a near annual visitor until Fawkes's death in 1825. Fawkes encouraged social gatherings at Farnley, and John Cam Hobhouse, the diarist, Whig politician and friend of Byron's, recorded in 1823 visiting the estate and remarked that Turner was there, employed in making designs for a museum intended to contain relics of our civil wars and to be called Fairfaxiana, adding that he believed the old part of the building was taken from an ancient mansion house of the Fairfax family. You can see that the hall is clearly made of two parts. The Georgian part was added on to the existing Elizabethan hall in 1786, the older section being left untouched. Fawkes did, however, embellish the older part in 1814 with features such as windows, oak panelling, and gateways from other halls on the Farnley estate, including from Menston Hall, previously owned by the antiquarian Charles Fairfax. Fawkes's collection of items included weaponry, such as the swords used at the Battle of Marston Moor of 1644, belonging to Oliver Cromwell, Sir Thomas Fairfax, General of the Parliamentarian Army and a fellow Wharfdale resident, and another local man, General John Lambert. There were also personal and everyday items, powerful in their emotional potency of association, including Cromwell's hat and pocket watch, Fairfax's battle drum, armour, a pair of candlesticks, and a mug made from the heel of Fairfax's boot. A seal of the Commonwealth and documents such as a benevolence dated 1626 from Charles I to Thomas Fairfax added a further element to the collection. Calling it Fairfaxiana, Fawkes seemed keen to particularly associate his collection with Sir Thomas Fairfax. Although the Fairfax family were originally royalist at the start of the Civil Wars, the actions of King Charles I in ignoring the plight of Yorkshire people and failing to follow parliamentary process meant the family joined the parliamentarian forces. Significantly, Fairfax, however, did not sign the warrant for the king's death, being instead disappointed with the outcome of the conflicts. Indeed, Fairfax escorted Charles II to the restoration of the throne in 1660. His politics resonated with Fawkes's own concerns regarding political governance and unfair representation, and with Fawkes's more moderate rather than radical ambition for reform. The collection, though, contained other artefacts representing the period, and in this, Fawkes was reflecting a general renewed national interest in the wars. At a time of social unrest in Britain and with the potential for further revolution, many look back to the English civil wars as a frame of reference for contemporary political events. The art of the period mirrored this interest, with representations of significant battles and iconic moments from the wars appearing on the art market from the late 18th century. However, even with his keen interest in the period, and in particular with the Battle of Marston Moor, Fawkes was not tempted by these paintings, but instead had his friend Turner produce a series of 5 watercolours of his collection, together with a frontispiece. Going beyond the mere illustration of an event, the men were adapting the historic record for a more interpretive reading, not only reforming the manner in which history could be represented, but also to maintain Fawkes's position to be able to politically influence the future. The frontispiece sets the scene for the vignettes. The painting takes the viewer through scenes from Fairfax's life, using an assemblage of items and places that Fawkes deemed worthy of memory and fitting of his own agenda. With the sarcophagus in the centre of the image, and with Fairfax's mug and helmet on the lid of the stone coffin, the work is presented as a funerary monument or a commemorative display to the general. The banner in the right foreground with the Fairfax arms confirms this reading. Chest armour, seen to the right, leaning against the sarcophagus, and the points of the pike and sword, Fairfax's weapons of war, take the eye to the architecture in the background. The arch is clearly that originally at Menston Hall, the building shown behind, and the home of Charles Fairfax, uncle to Sir Thomas. The hall became part of the Farnley estate in 1763, and Fawkes moved the arch to Farnley Hall in 1814. Perhaps that is what led Hobhouse to believe that the old part of Farnley Hall was taken from an ancient Fairfax mansion. At the left side of the painting, the arms of Cromwell, and just showing behind the banner of the Commonwealth, both refer to Fairfax's part with Cromwell in establishing the new order. Now, of particular interest in the context of Fawkes's relationship with Fairfax are the scrolls depicted in the foreground. Turner has included text, most not legible, but certain words stand out clearly and were meant to be read. The scroll to the left is clearly headed Fawkes, and beneath it the words Farnley and County of York stand out. The illusion created by the scrolls rolling from the top of the sarcophagus is that Fawkes is the successor to Fairfax. Since Fairfax had only one surviving child, a daughter who had no issue, his line ended. In this painting, it appears that Fawkes was making claim, if not genetically, then by the essence of his character, to the inheritance by positioning his pedigree flowing from Fairfax's tomb. The reason this association with Fairfax would have been important for Fawkes, aside from the political concord, was to maintain the squire's regional and national status. The seat of Fawkes was once recognised as the leading estate in Wharfdale, but was challenged by the relative newcomer Lascelles, a merchanting family who bought 2 Wharfdale estates in 1738. Building an extensive new Georgian mansion around 10 miles from Farnley, and with funds to support electioneering, the Lascelles presented a threat not only to the status of Fawkes's seat in Wharfdale, but also to his capacity for political campaigning. Fawkes could not compete with the financial resources, but he could compete on the grounds of having an established pedigree in the area with connections to nobility, which respected and fought for the people he represented. The frontispiece, therefore, is not only reminiscent of a funerary monument to Fairfax, referencing the role he played in the English Civil Wars and his associations with Wharftown, but was also a stage for Fawkes to lay claim to the general's character through the association of property and place, in order to maintain Fawkes's own status and so his influence over the future. Now, the themes of the frontispiece are carried through to the vignettes. Painted between 1815 and the mid-1820s, the 5 watercolours have a style and composition akin to still life, alluding to the fragility of life. And as you can see, they're very different from the watercolours that we more commonly know of Turner's work at Wharftown. The first image depicts a helmet above chest plate armour with a pair of pikes crossed behind in a traditional balanced and symmetrical composition of weaponry. The image also appears on Fairfax's black mug, shown on the sarcophagus in the frontispiece that we just looked at. The text written on the chest plate states, Fairfaxiana, or portraits and illustrations of the part which Thomas, Lord Fairfax, took in the defence of the liberties of his country. The text reiterates the theme of the frontispiece, the focus being with Fairfax, and confirms that Fawkes is particularly interested in the aspect of the protection of the nation's liberties. The second vignette is a curious play on perspective, with a drum appearing to be balanced on a very narrow wall tablet, again suggestive of a memorial. Across the top of the drum lies Fairfax's sword, and above that is another helmet. There's also a red fabric pouch with shot and bullets. The inscription reads, the helmet, sword and drum of Sir Thomas, afterwards Lord Fairfax, and shot and bullets found at Marston Moor, in the possession of Walter Fawkes, Esquire of Farnley. Now, the use of the tablet form follows the pattern of family memorials, with the name of the deceased at the top of the inscription and the commemorator at the end. It seems a deliberate intention of Fawkes to use the device to associate himself again as linked through family or inheritance to Fairfax. The next vignette in the series depicts Fairfax's wheeled chair that he designed himself to help him get around his home in his later years. Leaning against the chair with the handle to the ground is Fairfax's sword, and lying on the floor is a mace, a weapon associated with nobility and indicating Sir Thomas's later status as a lord. The position of the sword with the point uppermost suggests victory. The tip, though the pointing of the tip under the cloak gives a sense of a bittersweet triumph, the tip representing a thorn in Fairfax's side, alluding to the uncomfortable situation for the general where victory led to regicide. The vignette has the impression of the final chapter in the narration of Fairfax's role in the Civil Wars, implying his return home with lasting injuries from his wounds sustained in battle and inheriting the lordship. The fourth vignette shows the 3 swords of Cromwell, Lambert and Fairfax pointing downwards and spearing through the 1626 benevolence of King Charles I. The benevolence was raised by the king as a forced loan after Parliament had denied him funds. The image is the text Cause and Effect, with the dates 1626 to 1648. They're very pale, very in the bottom of the vignette there, covering the first of the 3 phases of the wars. This image is particularly powerful in its use of documentary evidence to convey that the wars were the result of a corrupt king. This vignette is less of a tribute to Fairfax and more of how Fawkes saw the necessity and justification for the civil wars. It's significant that a hand-coloured aquatint etching exists of this watercolour, privately printed from an engraving of the watercolour and dated 1821, suggesting that Fawkes intended or did distribute the image. The print includes an explanatory text by Fawkes that reveals his concern to not only display how the king sought money without parliamentary consent, but also to convey his own status as an antiquarian, iterating that the weapons and documents were all preserved at his country seat in an excellent state of preservation. The statement emphasises Fawkes's credentials as a guardian of history and respectful antiquarian, and also acts as an advertisement to encourage people to come to Farnley to view these historical papers for themselves. The final vignette in the series is the charming watercolour of a cabinet with doors that open to reveal the contents. Now, I don't know if you can see on the image, but there's two sort of, on the two doors, you can just see the roughened edges that actually open up. And I'll show you the next image where they're open. There you go, you can see the two side panels and the contents revealed. Placing items in a cabinet such as this follows the traditions of a cabinet of curiosities. Fawkes's cabinet not only appears to closely follow the traditional format of contents, including armour and personal effects, but the playful manner in which Turner portrayed it with the opening door flaps creates an almost overwhelming sense of curiosity in the viewer when presented with the watercolour to wish to open the doors and see inside, echoing the anticipation felt by a visitor when presented with the real thing. On the top shelf, the central position is taken up by the small oil portrait of Sir Thomas Fairfax by Abraham Cooper that we saw in the slide earlier. To either side of the painting are portraits of Oliver and Richard Cromwell, and in front are the swords again of Cromwell, Fairfax and Lambert. To the far side is Cromwell's watch, and to the far right, the seal of the Commonwealth. The swords are lying on a red folio with Fairfaxiana written on the spine. The lower shelf has some symmetry, but is not so perfectly matched and includes Fairfax's candlesticks, Cromwell's hat, and again Fairfax's mug. The cabinet has a different focus from the previous vignettes. The first three were reflections on Fairfax, and the fourth about the cause of the civil wars. The cabinet watercolour is less about conveying a political message and more about showing a competence in scholarly erudition regarding the role of cabinets of curiosities and a knowledge and proficiency in their arrangements. In his Views of the Seats of Noblemen and Gentlemen of 1822, John Preston Neal described the cabinet at Farnley. This inclusion would have been a powerful advertisement, attracting visitors and putting Farnley on the list of country houses to visit. Having potentially influential guests was not only beneficial for Fawkes in terms of widening his social network, it was also important in reminding the nation of the significance of Wharfdale and the West Riding in English history. The area had not only played an important part in the civil wars, but thereafter had played an influential role in that it had been used as an electoral barometer for the rest of the country. However, with the rise in trade and importance of areas such as Liverpool, Hull, and Bristol, the primacy of Yorkshire was under threat. Furthermore, the long-established seats of Wharfdale were changing hands as families sold up or lost their line of inheritance, and merchants such as the Lascelles invested their wealth in country houses that displayed their newfound status. Despite major drives for agricultural improvement, Fawkes could not compete with Lascelles in terms of financial wealth, size of property, or elaborate decoration. But he could compete in terms of offering a magnificent collection of 17th century artifacts to display his patriotic interest and longevity in the area. Having the collection and displaying it to advantage was not only pertinent to Fawkes's politics, it was also a strategy to maintain his status in Wharfdale and nationally, and to reiterate the importance of the West Riding both in history and in the role it was playing in advancing the contemporary reforming agenda. Summarising Fairfaxiana, it can be seen that the collection of Turner's watercolours explained the causes and effects of the civil wars in a manner to advance Fawkes's own agenda for political reform. With a primary focus on the role played by the Wharfdale resident Sir Thomas Fairfax, they also served to promote the area and Farnley, and secured Fawkes's status as an established squire and scholar, thereby enabling him to maintain a position of political influence on the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. We already have one question, which Patrick asks, is there any symbolic significance to Cromwell's hat in the cabinet?
Well, the interesting thing about the hat, it's got a white paper, I don't know if you can just see it sort of tied in there, which was used, so the parliamentarians used to use a white sort of marker, so on the battlefield they could identify each other. So that's nice that it's shown in that painting. The hat still exists, but it doesn't have the white addition on it anymore. But yeah, and I think it's part of that, having a personal item like that is that strength of that emotional potency, the value of the item in history, isn't it? You feel the connection to something when you have a personal item from that person.
Thank you. Clive comments at a fascinating talk, but he adds, do you know if he was successful in attracting famous visitors to Farnley Hall?
Yeah, there are. I mean, Charles Waterton, very famous natural historian. David Attenborough says that he was the first sort of environmental scientist. He was a frequent visitor. I mean, Turner has got to be the most famous visitor, I would guess. Yeah, I mean, the number of people, Robert Hill's another famous watercolorist, he stayed there. George Walker, who painted the costumes of Yorkshire, he was a frequent visitor, and Fawkes was known for his hospitality and had lots of functions, and was also known for debate. So he had lots of visitors from London passing through. John Cam Hobhouse is a very good example. That there were many. Yeah, he was a good host.
Could people just turn up like at a stately home today and say, I'd like to see?
I think back then, Fawkes also had a London residence. So he spent the season in London, came back to Farnley for shooting, and that was a very social time. So lots of people came to shoot and had their discussions and made their connections and their what we might now call networking opportunities, that sort of thing. But people, when you were in the books, the travel books such as Patterson's, or you're mentioned by John Preston Neal, there was a kind of a circuit, and people would turn up and there would be a housekeeper who would perhaps show them the rooms, that sort of thing. So that did happen, but I think that Fawkes mostly had people there to stay with him, usually for the shooting.
Thank you. So another question is, where are the artifacts now?
Some of them are scattered. Some of them have been given to museums, and some there are some remaining at Farnley, but generally, sadly, the cabinet itself is empty now.
So Diane reminds us that there was a Thorsby Society visit to Farnley Hall a few years ago.
Right.
The host was Guy Fawkes.
Yes.
And Diane goes on to ask, Turner didn't visit there after Walter Fawkes died. No. Any idea why?
Well, the reports are actually quite sad. I mean, Ruskin says that, Turner couldn't talk of Fawkes's name without a tear coming to his eye, or emotion in his voice. And clearly the men shared a great friendship. And I guess when you suffer grief like that, perhaps you don't want to go back to the place where you had such happy memories without that knowing that person won't be there anymore. He did keep in contact with Fawkes's son, Hawksworth, They did meet in London, and he did see Fawkes's widow twice the following year in London. So he did keep in contact with the family, and they sent him annually Christmas packs of game and things, and pie and such things. So there was communication right up until Turner's death, but Turner never actually went back to Farnley Hall.
So Jill asks the wider question. She says she's interested in the contrast between this very specific link to the mid-17th century and the wider 19th century ideas of olden time. How conscious would Fawkes have been of this?
I think he was fascinated by the civil wars. His book collection contained loads of volumes related to the English civil wars, and I think he just saw a sort of a repeating pattern, what he believed was happening in the politics of his time, with people not being listened to, and Parliament perhaps making decisions that hadn't followed due parliamentary process. And he felt that with the social unrest that was going on at the time, there were echoes back to the unrest before the civil wars. And I think it was kind of his warning, saying, this is what happened then. Think now we need to act to stop another civil war situation. So I think he also wrote lots of speeches and makes reference to the English civil wars again and again. It's obviously important to him.
There was a question saying, intrigued by the spelling Fairfaxiana in the cabinet. Does this have any meaning?
Well, Turner is not known for his spelling ability. I don't know, he wrote a lot of poetry, he's had skills elsewhere, so I don't think it's really of any significance, except that he felt things the way he wanted to spell them at any particular time.
Thank you very much. There are I can't see any more questions, but a lot of people now posting thank you messages.